All right, welcome to week 2 of ethics. This is the 4th video in the course, and we are going to be talking about the basics of argument. Argument is an idea that I talk about in all my courses, and I actually assign a reading like this and exercises like this in all of my courses, because argument is central to philosophy. And if you want to look at any issue philosophically, you have to look at it using the tools of argument. So the basic concept that we're working with here is that of a statement. And if you have been taking good notes, you should just be able to find in your notes a definition of the definition of a statement. So a statement is a unit of language that can be true or false. So there are lots of things we can do with words. We can ask questions, we can give commands. Sometimes we make statements. So this keeps changing side. So a statement is meant to contrast with things like a sentence fragment, where you don't have enough words to make a full statement. So if I just say wandering disoriented in a field, that's a sentence fragment. There are also complete sentences that are not statements. Questions, like why is that man wandering disoriented in a field? Or commands, stop wandering and do something with your life. These things are not statements. Also exclamations, oh, the poor man. So your first exercise was just to identify which of the following things are statements in the logical sense. And some of these are pretty straightforward, but some of them might be a little bit more tricky. So England is smaller than China. Yeah, that's a statement. It's just a true statement. Greenland is south of Jerusalem. Well, that's false, but it's still a statement, because a statement can be true or false. Is New Jersey east of Wisconsin? Well, that's not a statement. That's a question. The atomic number of helium is 2 is a statement. The atomic number of helium is pi is a statement. Even though it's actually kind of silly, right? Because if you remember your chemistry, atomic numbers have to be whole numbers. It can't be pi. But it doesn't matter because it has the form of something that can be true or false. So the next 3 go together, actually. I hate overcooked noodles. Blech, overcooked noodles. And overcooked noodles are disgusting. Actually, the first and the last ones are statements, and the middle one is an exclamation. It's funny because they all kind of do roughly the same thing, but only the first one and only I hate overcooked noodles and overcooked noodles are disgusting have the form of a statement. Blech, overcooked noodles has the form of an exclamation, even though you could all use them you could use them all in roughly the same contexts. Also, some of these might be things you would think of as opinions, like overcooked noodles are disgusting. But as I tried to emphasize by showing that John Corvino video, the fact-opinion distinction isn't actually important for what we're doing, because both facts and opinions amount to statements, and statements can either be supported by evidence or not. Take your time. That's a command, not a statement. This is the last question is a statement. It's not a question. All right. With statements, we build arguments. And again, this is something that you should be able to know the definition of right off the top of your head and be able to explain in various ways. The official definition of an argument in this course is that an argument is a connected series of statements designed to convince an audience of another statement. So Arguments are made of statements. Some of them are premises, some of them are conclusions. The conclusion is the statement that we're trying to convince the audience of, and the premises are the statements that do the convincing. So for your homework, you had to write arguments in standard form, which just means that you list the premises, you number them, you draw a line, you write the conclusion. It's meant to look something like arithmetic, because like arithmetic, arguments are basic functions in reasoning. When you put things in standard form, it's okay to paraphrase them to make them shorter. But you must use complete sentences and you must keep the basic meaning intact. If you see something that is a question or a command, turn it into a statement, because arguments are composed of statements. You want to delete irrelevant material and also redundant material. So sometimes in regular speech, someone will state their conclusion twice, often just at the beginning and the end, and you only need one of those. And you want to remove the indicator words. The indicator words are words like therefore and because, which are meant to clue the audience into the idea that you are giving an argument. All right, so if this were a live class, we'd be presenting some of the questions, answers on the board. I've got a quick video here that shows you some of the answers for Part C, and there is a full answer sheet that is available online. But again, you want to do the homework on your own before you check your answers against the answer sheet. All right, so in this video, I'm going to go over some of the answers to homework questions in section 1.2 Part C. If you haven't tried to answer these on your own, please go back and try to answer them on your own before you watch this video. There's no penalty for just copying my answers, but you'll fail the test if you don't do this kind of practice. All right, so the thing that you wanted to do here is just rewrite arguments in standard form. And I've just printed out the question sheet, and you're given these passages. First thing to remember is that the stuff in italics is the context. And whenever arguments are happening in the real world, the context is key. So often when I'm trying to be realistic, we'll have that italics passage there. But you don't want to include that in the canonical form. What you do want to do when you are in standard form, that is, what you do want to do when you're trying to rewrite an argument in standard form is look for the conclusion. So if you notice, there are actually only two statements here. And they're connected by this word, so. Henry's fingerprints were on the stolen computer, and there's a word so, and then it says, I infer that Henry stole the computer. What that means is one of these statements is going to be a premise, and one of them is going to be the conclusion. The indicator word here, so, says that what comes after is the conclusion, and therefore what comes first is the premise. So when we write it in canonical form, we just do this. P1, Henry's fingerprints were on the computer. And then conclusion, Henry stole the computer. And you draw a line through here. And yeah, you're looking at my terrible handwriting here, but that's not the point. A couple things to note. Since I'm writing this out by hand, I decided to paraphrase this first statement. Rather than saying stolen computer, I shortened it as much as I could because I didn't feel like writing all of that out. And it's fine to paraphrase if you're writing by hand. When you're on the computer, it's easier just to cut and paste. You can do that too. The important thing is that I kept this as a complete statement and kept its basic meaning intact. So that's one thing that you have to do. And then for the conclusion, I wrote Henry stole the computer, and I left out this indicator word so. That is not part of the standard form for the argument. You write it down here below. Indicator so. All right. Another thing to note about this is that in this version, in this argument, the conclusion comes last. And when we write things in standard form, the conclusion also comes last. But in ordinary English, the conclusion can come anywhere in the passage. It could be at the end, it could be at the beginning, it could be in the middle. Sometimes it gets repeated. Actually, repeating your conclusion at the beginning and ending of an argument is a very strong way to argue rhetorically. And when you get that kind of repetition and you want it to write it in standard form, you just delete one of the repetitions of the thesis, the conclusion, and you write it at the end. Here's the next argument. Monica is wondering about one of her co-workers' political opinions. Context setting, we can ignore that. The passage consists of several statements. The first thing to note is that this right here, this block, is actually all one statement. You can't break it up into smaller statements. The full passage is, you cannot both oppose abortion and support the death penalty unless you think there's a difference between fetuses and felons. If you take any part of that out, you're changing the meaning. So that's all one statement. Your indicator word is here. There's your therefore. That means that what comes afterwards is the conclusion. Steve thinks there's a difference between fetuses and felons. So this is a second one where the conclusion comes last. We can write it out like this. P1. You cannot both oppose abortion and support the death penalty. Death penalty. Unless you think there is a difference between fetuses and felons. P2. Steve supports death penalty and opposes abortion. Conclusion. Steve thinks there is a difference between fetuses and felons. And again, my handwriting is terrible. And then you need to be sure to write the indicator word, find space here. Therefore. Okay. Next one. Problem 3. The Grand Moff of Earth Defense considers strategy. So right away, when you look at the context, you can see this is a silly made-up example. And that's fine. We can talk about arguments in silly made-up examples all the time. We know that whenever people from one planet invade another, they will always end up being killed by the local diseases. Because. So here's your indicator word right here. And you can see that this time, everything that comes before it is the conclusion. This one is conclusion first. Right? So let's go ahead and write that part in. Indicator word because. And then you write the conclusion down here. We know, and we know that actually is functioning as a indicator word as well. So we'll block that off. Whenever people from one planet invade another, they always wind up being killed by the local diseases. Okay, so what are the premises then? In 1938, when Martians invaded Earth, they were defeated because they lacked immunity to Earth diseases. We'll have to shorten that. We'll say P1 Martians were defeated by Earth diseases in 1938. All right, and then premise 2, in 1944, when Hitler's forces landed on the moon, they were killed by moon diseases. P2, in 1942, Hitler's forces were killed by moon diseases. So that's the argument in standard form. You may stop for a second and say, this argument's really ridiculous. I mean, Hitler invading the moon, what the hell? But notice that it actually has the exact same format as an argument that sounds much more reasonable. Whenever a country tries to invade Russia in winter, they wind up being defeated by the harsh weather. We know this because when Napoleon tried to invade Russia in winter, he was defeated by the harsh weather. And when Hitler tried to invade Russia in winter, he was defeated by the harsh weather. So it's the same form of the argument, but now we've substituted in real examples. So one of the things that is important when we talk about argument is learning to distinguish the form of the argument from the content of the example, where sometimes the content of the example might be silly or false, but the form still might be good. Okay, I'm going to skip ahead to the last exercise in this set just to give you a sense of the different places that a conclusion can occur in an English passage. So here, a detective is trying to crack a case, and they think to themselves. This is a case of internal reasoning. It's also another example from Clue. Right? Miss Scarlet was jealous that Professor Plum would not leave his wife for her. Therefore, she must be the killer because. Look, it's got this weird construction, therefore, because. So you've got two indicator phrases here. Therefore, or indicator words. Therefore and because. Right? So this is actually conclusion middle. Miss Scarlet must be the killer. So when we write this in, we can just substitute Miss Scarlet for the pronoun she. And now we see that the things on either side of the conclusion are premises. P1, P2. And we can just shorten this full long premise to Miss Scarlet was jealous. Another exercise that you needed to do asks you to distinguish things that were arguments from things that are not arguments. So it helps to understand an argument to think about what's not an argument. A simple statement of belief is not an argument. If you say, I believe a bunch, you're not actually arguing, you're just saying what you believe. Expository passages, that is a passage that is organized around a topic, is not an argument. So you've got a bunch of statements, but none of them support each other. You're just describing something. Newspaper reporting often falls in this category. A narrative is a sequence of statements, but rather than giving an argument, they just describe events in time. The last one is explanation. Explanations have the same format as arguments. However, their goal is not to convince an audience of a statement. They are working on statements that the audience already believes, and we're trying to understand them deeper by understanding why they are true. So again, we're going to insert some homework answers here. So this is from an article by Bob Willis in Bloomberg News, old newspaper article, 2012. The unemployment rate dropped to 8.3%, the lowest since February 2009, Labor Department figures showed today in Washington. And there's more stats. This was the biggest increase in jobs in 9 months. Service industries grew by the most this year, according to a separate report. So there are a bunch of stats here. This is just reporting on a bunch of events, right? It's also in the news section of a newspaper, and that tends to indicate that it's not, there's not going to be an argument there. So we're going to say not an argument. Reporting. And ultimately, the reason why something is or is not an argument is always going to be that there's no conclusion, or that there is a conclusion. Statements don't support each other. All right, so that one's not an argument. All right, the next one, look at how different this is. For starters, there's the presence of this indicator word, so. That lets you know that the speaker at least wants you to believe that they're giving an argument, and the thing afterwards is the conclusion. So it's an argument. I suspect that. Actually, I suspect is another indicative phrase. It indicates confidence. So, a low level of confidence. So, conclusion, cell phone use is bad for the economy. Premise 1, economy is doing badly. Premise 2, cell phone use is up. Note that this is a terrible argument, but nevertheless it's an argument. Indicator word so. I want to go into detail about the difference between arguing and explaining. We want to say that in general they are both forms of reasoning. What you want to do with reasoning, you take one or more statements as reasons for another statement. However, when you argue, those reasons are used to try to convince an audience of something they do not currently believe. When you explain, those reasons help you understand something you already believe more by understanding how it came to be true or why it came to be true. So arguments and explanations have similar structures. An argument has premises which prove a conclusion. And explanations have explainers which clarify an explainee. So the general term for what's going on is reasoning. The premises or the explainers can be thought of as reasons, and the conclusion or the explainee is the target proposition. So again, an explanation is exactly like an argument. The difference is that the thing at the bottom is not known in the case of an argument and known in the case of an explanation. Sometimes the exact same thing can be an argument or an explanation depending on context. Look at this example. Monica visits Steve's cubicle. All your plants are dead. Steve, it's because I never water them. The word because indicates that reasoning is going on there. However, Steve is not trying to prove that his plants are dead, because they both concede that the plants are dead. Instead, he is giving an explanation as to why they are dead. No one watered Steve's plants explains the fact that Steve's plants are dead. Both of these things are actually known. Now imagine the same conversation, but they're away from the office. Did you have anyone water your plants while you were away? No. I bet they're all dead. Now, the fact that the plants aren't being watered allows us to infer something that isn't yet known, that Steve's plants are dead. So the last set of homework exercises that you were supposed to do for this set involves distinguishing arguments from explanations. And ordinarily, if this were a live class, you'd be doing them on the board. But I've got an answer sheet that I've published, and I've got a quick video here that shows me working through a few of them to help you understand how to do them. For this last section, you needed to distinguish arguments from explanations, and I'm just going to hit a couple of these. And again, the full answers will be posted on the answer sheet, and don't look at the answers until you've at least given them a shot yourself, because otherwise you won't be ready for the test. So, arguments and explanations. Arguments and explanations have the same basic format. They're both examples of reasoning. The difference is that an explanation is given for something that is already known to be true. So now look at this first one. This is from a science education website run by NASA. So if you plug in the question, why is the sky blue, at least when I was doing this, this is one of the first websites that come up. Ignore that question mark. So why is the sky blue? Blue light is scattered in all directions by the tiny molecules in Earth's atmosphere. Blue is scattered more than other colors because it travels in shorter, smaller waves. Look at that indicator word, because. This is why that indicates a target, a target sentence, some kind of conclusion or explainee. We see a blue sky most of the time. So this is an explanation. It's an explanation because we already know the sky is blue, right? That's supposed to be a completely obvious thing. So we'll just write down here, the sky is blue. And then we're going to number some other statements. Blue light is scattered to blue light travels in shorter wavelengths. There's actually more going on in this passage, and I've got a fuller explanation on the answer sheet, but for right now that's enough. The point that you want to see here is that reasoning is going on. People are saying this is why something is true. People are saying because. But all of this reasoning is happening about a completely well-known, obvious proposition. The sky is blue. So it's an explanation. We know the sky is blue. Okay. The next one is an argument. And so this one's a little bit tricky because it's kind of a weird argument. But let's go ahead and look at it. So a guy's reading a magazine. He says that research shows that people who rate themselves very happy are less successful financially than those who rate themselves moderately happy. He says, it looks like a little unhappiness is good in life. It's kind of a weird conclusion to draw, but notice that he is drawing a conclusion. what he reads in the magazine is a premise. Very happy people, less rich. And then he draws the immediate conclusion, a little happiness is good in life. Unhappiness is good. This is an argument Jack is drawing, making an inference in his head. It's a strange inference. The inference that I would make is that money isn't that important. But he is facing with a dilemma here, and he's inferring that unhappiness is not as important as you would think, because he has a hidden premise, right, that money is important.